Good morning and welcome to our FoodBytes webinar series. My name is Jillian Rago. I'm with the FoodBytes team, and today our topic is taking action for justice. Now, before we jump into it, I have a few housekeeping items that I'd like to address. First and foremost, let me explain today. We are hosting our 9th webinar in our effort to continue to connect and support our FoodBytes community. To date, we've had over 1,600 attendees across from Australia to New York to the Netherlands and beyond, continuing to showcase our global platform. And now I'll quickly pass it over to my colleague Sonia Shaker, who's going to share a brief overview of our FoodBytes platform. Sonia?
Thanks, Jillian. We want to extend a very warm welcome to the companies that are new to our network. Through FoodBytes, we aim to create opportunities for entrepreneurs within the food and ag community that we've brought together over the past several years. Our programs, including these webinars, show how our community can build each other up during challenging times. For background on our main programs, FoodBytes Pitch is a digital series of structured mentor sessions, investor meetings, and corporate introductions, culminating in a live-streamed pitch on the final day. And FoodBytes Pilot pairs a corporate and a startup together over 6 to 9 months to collaborate on a specific goal or industry challenge. So if you're an investor or corporate interested in partnership, please reach out to us at foodbytes@rabobank.com. Or if you're a startup interested in learning more about our pitch or pilot program, please fill out the interest form on our website at foodbytesworld.com. Applications for FoodBytes Pitch are opening on July 5th, so please be sure to mark your calendars. And back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Sonia. So today we're going to be hearing from 3 of our FoodBytes startup alumni on what it means to take action for justice. Joining us from Hawaii, and it's very early there, is Bella Hughes. She is the founder and president of Shaka Tea. In Chicago, we have Jordan Buckner. He is the founder and CEO of TeaSquares. And over in the UK, we have Julianne Ponan, who is the owner and CEO of Creative Nature. Some of the discussions that we're going to get into are really focusing on just instilling diversity within the workplace and how we can start to do that, as well as looking at what kind of actions we can take within the broader food industry landscape, rethinking the investment landscape to make it more equitable and diverse, and really highlighting some of the personal stories and anecdotes that our startup founders are going to share with us today. So to kick it off, I'd like to start with some introductions. Bella, if you could start giving us an introduction of yourself and your company and why you felt compelled to come on the webinar today.
Thank you. And first and foremost, thank you so much to the FoodBytes community and Rabobank for being not only incredibly supportive of startup brands, but for having and making space for very, very timely and relevant conversations. I'm really honored to be on this webinar. A little bit about us. My name is Bella Hughes. I was born and raised in Hawaii. My mother is a first-generation immigrant from Iran. My father's family has been living in Hawaii for a few generations. My great-grandfather is Hispanic Jamaican, immigrated to Hawaii. So as we say in the islands, I'm a poi dog, all mixed up. You know, Shaka Tea, I spent previously a decade in arts and culture, and most of my work was focused on really amplifying the voices of non-Western artists, particularly focused on Kanaka Maoli, Indigenous Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and Middle Eastern artists. You know, I completely switched gears. I co-founded Shaka Tea with my husband, love of my life, and business partner, Harrison Rice, and we're really rooted in what we believe is the Be the Aloha movement. Aloha is goodness, kindness, respect, love, humility, and, you know, from leaf to bottle, our company connects local supply chain with sustainably sourced Mamaki herbal tea leaves that we pay local small farmers an abundant price point for to national and now with Japan global demand by creating a clean label, Project Non-GMO verified, zero sugar product. And a big thing for us in Justice is not only how we take care of Aina, the land in Hawaii, and how we honor and pay farmers. We have the highest cost of living and lowest wages in the nation, but it's about making an equitably priced beverage for all Americans. Our SRP is $198 to $249. Really, really proud of that price point. So that's a little bit about us and our story.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bella. Over to you, Jordan, next to take it away with an intro.
Excellent. Thanks so much, everyone on the FoodBytes team as well. This has been an incredible experience being partnered up with the organization, and really appreciate the topic of conversation for the day. Obviously very timely and extremely important. So a little bit about myself, Jordan Buckner, CEO and co-founder of TeaSquares. We make a line of deliciously crunchy energy bars designed to help you stay focused and alert through the day from the various superfoods that we use, including matcha, adaptogens, coconut oil, all for brain function. The other part of our company is that we have a strong social mission to really help young adults from underserved neighborhoods and communities with employment opportunities. So we actually are based in the south side of Chicago, in the greater Inglewood neighborhood, and manufacture all of their products ourselves in our facility. We actually work with individuals who come from backgrounds who were either previously incarcerated or were single parents and are looking to provide for their families. And that mission is really core to the belief in the business that's integral. Growing up as an entrepreneur in a family of entrepreneurs, my dad always said, in running a business, you have to be able to take care of yourself, your family, and your employees and community. And with everything that you do, be sure to give back and help those around you. And so that became an integral part of the fabric of TeaSquares. Along the way, we've been successful. We've been awarded the Forbes 30 Under 30 award, and really kind of moving forward, especially with today's topic, our employees have been disproportionately impacted both by the COVID pandemic and by racial injustice and violence that happens every day. And so as they kind of grow, it's really made a huge impact on their life and with our company as well. So excited to talk about some of their challenges and ways that we can go about creating change for them and the greater food industry as well.
Thank you, Jordan. Yeah, I think a lot of that's going to be brought up for discussion today, so I appreciate that. And last but not least, I'm going to pass it over to Julianne Ponan. Julianne, hopefully you can hear us and we can see you. Are you there?
Yes, so I'm Julianne Ponan. I'm the owner and founder of Creative Nature. We basically do a range of products that cater for the top 14 allergens. So I started my company with the ethos and mission to basically help people who suffer from anaphylaxis. So I suffer from anaphylaxis myself. I'm allergic to all nuts, chickpeas, lentils, sesame, etc. And I've had a lot of near-death experiences from it, where food has been labelled wrong, and also people who are in our food industry understand that labelling can be quite difficult. So I'm helping people along the way with that. We have a range of products like home baking mixes. We also have snack bars, and also our brand new product called Norbles, which is like a healthy Malteser. It's got 46% less sugar. What makes us a bit different as well is we have a full focus on advocating people who suffer from allergies, and also giving back to our local farmers and growers from around the world, as we source directly from Peru, Hawaii, and a lot of Europe as well. We've tried to keep our products at a good RRP for the consumer, as that is so important. Being able to get product into the hands of children, especially, who want to have less sugar, as the obesity is on the rise, it is a key point for us as a company. So our snack bars only retail at 99 pence, and we're doing a lot of work, hopefully in the future, with the NHS.
Fantastic. Thanks, Julianne. Now, I want to start by kind of talking, I think you've all touched on advocacy and all of these values that you've already been instilling within your companies. I think it's really a part of your DNA. With the recent horrific death of George Floyd, we've started to see this global response in the form of protests, and also these calls to be more accountable for diversity and equity in the workplace. You'd all shared some sort of immediate responses and action items that you had begun to instill within your own workplaces. Can you share some of those first steps you each took as leaders of your organizations?
Yeah, definitely. So as I alluded to, we have 4 employees on our manufacturing team. All of them are um, live in this underserved community. They're all Black. And one thing, especially as things were going on, that's important in our company was being able to ask each of our employees how they were doing. And a simple question of understanding the issues that are going on in their personal lives and their personal emotions outside of work makes a huge impact on how they show up both at work and to their coworkers. And we had, these honesty conversations about their fears, their frustrations, their hopes and their dreams. And making and creating space for them to be open and vulnerable was extremely important. And one thing that a number of people have been calling about, from LinkedIn and other posts is really to, even for larger companies especially, is asking your employees, both your Black employees, but also everyone, how they're doing. I think there's an expectation that business and personal life needs to be separate. And I think really we understand that the things that happen in the world in our personal lives affect our business. So it's really important to create space for those conversations.
Bella, I know you had been talking a little bit too about some of those first responses and especially around education and giving your team time off to process. And I'm hoping you can talk a little bit more about that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just seconding Jordan, speaking to employees and not separating the personal and professional is really, really core to our company, our culture. And we're also a very small team. There are 10 of us. Mind you, we're based in Hawaii and we're the only non-white majority state. 7 out of 10 of our employees are people of color, a number of indigenous people of color. And, for us, this has just been something that I think just starting over the weekend already we were communicating about, and then on Monday we the Monday before I think most people did Blackout Tuesday, we just took a half day because I think one of the most important things you can do, there's such a difference to being boldly anti-racist and not being racist, and sometimes we feel very removed from some of the larger national conversations being based in Hawaii. It's quite different in culturally on a myriad of levels. But, I think one of the most important things was for all of us to take time off and to really, really understand deeply systemic racism. And then we also, personally, one of my team members, her husband is Black, and she'd shared with me really early on, one of the reasons they decided to settle in Hawaii is due to us being so ethnically diverse, and we are a majority people of color state. So just that comfort level of raising a beautiful biracial family here. So on a personal note, especially reaching out to her and her family and offering any extended time she may need was really important. And then we wanted to also right away, even though we're a small startup, put our money where our mouth is. So we identified a number of Black-led and founded organizations, and we made a donation in honor of every team member as well as our paid summer interns. And we encourage them to do research as well. And then on our end, we are all honoring and recognizing as a company paid holiday, Juneteenth. And we launched a fundraiser for our local Black-led organization, the Popolo Project, which was a great response. Many people from Rabobank ended up purchasing, and we were able to raise money, nearly $600. And those are some of the steps, but I feel like it's an ongoing conversation and something that we're very, very committed to personally and professionally.
Thank you. Yeah, those are fantastic action items. And, on that note of advocacy and sort of internal education, Julianne, I know you had shared some thoughts around that too and how your organization was taking a stance there.
Yes, so we've been sitting down internally and we're continuing to do that and exploring new ways of actively encouraging people of all races and religion to work for our company. It is also very difficult for example, we are in a predominantly white area, and so actually getting people to apply to work for a company like us is difficult, and I think that needs to be addressed as well. So say we get 10 applicants and say only one of them apply is Black. It's very hard to get more and more people to apply, and I think that's where it needs to happen from education. And if it happens in the education system, maybe we'll get more Black and ethnic minorities applying to our jobs that we are putting out there. So yeah, we've been sitting down looking at that. We've been looking at also why we need to change from the bottom up. Again, we are a small team, similar to Bella's size. We just have a manufacturing arm as well. And it's just interesting as I assessed how many Black people we actually had in our manufacturing team, and it was interesting to see that we actually didn't have any on the manufacturing side, and I questioned the team as to why was that, and it was purely on applications, and that was sad to see that there was literally no Black or ethnic minorities applying to that role even. So yeah, it's, again, we're working with a lot of charities at the moment, figuring out which ones we want to continue to work with over the course of the next year as well. As okay, yes, it's fantastic to donate now, as everyone is talking about this, but we can't let this just be a tick box. It needs to be an ongoing conversation, and it needs to be ongoing donations to help this carry on. So yeah, that's pretty much what we've been doing at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you've all touched on some really strong sort of internal workplace action items, and I want to shift gears a little and talk about, on the broader sort of food industry landscape, what we can be doing. Before we jump into that, just a quick reminder to our audience to please submit any questions you might have for our speakers using that Q&A function on the right-hand side of your screen. But back to the topic at hand, how can we promote justice and racial equality within the broader food industry? I think you'd all brought up some interesting points on our previous discussions around it. Bella, maybe you want to kick us off. You had some thoughts on amplifying voices in this space.
Well, I'm so grateful to be where Shaka Tea is, and we're still only 10 steps into the 100 journey, I feel, of success. And all the mentors I've had, very on a personal note, it's really been important to me over the past year to ensure that the type of mentorship I received where I was 4 years ago and 3 years ago, I'm giving that back. And all my mentees are people of color and primarily women, and very, very focused and committed to that. So that's just on a personal note, what I think any founder can do. If you're at least 1 or 2 years in, you've definitely learned something that you can share, and nothing like peer-to-peer mentorship. And then in terms of, what you can do as a founder, it's an interesting time for us because there are 2 pandemics going on, both critically, relevant, important, and timely. And then we had a capital investment announcement. And one of the things that, it's a very small thing, but I do think you can do is, if you look at, in general, like the way that the media is in food and beverage and industry publications, most of the brands covered are not terribly diverse. So I've had a really great response speaking with journalists and, thanking them for their interest to cover Shaka Tea's recent round, do an interview, and say, completely separate from this conversation, I'd love to talk about your commitment to amplifying Black founded businesses. I'd love to introduce you to some businesses or recommend them. And then if you're interested, but I hope you're going to cover, a number of founders I know. And the response has been really great. And I think there's just, in general, what I've seen is like journalists are really, really open to this. And for some reason, one of the comments I kept hearing is, oh, well, you go to, X trade show. I won't name the trade show names, but it's the lack of diversity is surprising. And I'm like, well, it costs $5,000 to $10,000 to get in there, which means you need to raise capital to get there. And when you look, which I know we'll get to later in our discussion about the amount of investment capital going to founders of color, Black founded businesses, women, it's so small, it kind of makes sense why you don't see as much representation where most of the food and beverage journalists tend to go and find new brands to cover. So that's just a small little, personal note on my end of what I've been doing.
That's fantastic. I think that's it's so important in just what you can do on an individual level. And it reminds me too, Jordan, you had talked about sort of flipping the narrative as well, and especially when it comes to Black founders. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Definitely. So if you look right now, it's the huge movement in terms of promoting Black-owned businesses across all industries right now, from restaurants to fashion to food. And I think that's amazing. I think highlighting voices of color, is really important in terms of giving those businesses the spotlight. And so I think that's definitely a place that we are right now in terms of highlighting those voices. What I would love to see is a more diverse coverage of businesses just throughout the entire year, where instead of specifically focusing on Black-owned businesses in this moment, that whenever there's, as Bella just mentioned, as journalists, as investors, as promoters in the food industry, as companies look at what companies are rising and how they can support them, having a lens for identifying not just Black, but minority and women-owned companies and providing them with a platform to share their brand, I think is incredibly important. And giving those brands an opportunity to succeed and get the same kind of shelf space and recognition as any other company, I think is extremely important. Ideally, as the representation grows, getting to a point where we can look at businesses as just being a successful food business that just happens to be Black owned, instead of supporting every business as a Black owned or women owned business, because it creates a separation point as being different from just another business owner. And I think that's really important, is getting to that point where we just see all business together, but also understand the unique struggles that each founder might go through.
I love that, Jordan. I just want to say, because when we did a pre-panel prep, what you said made so much sense. And just a small point, like in my former life in art and culture for a decade, focusing on non-Western artists, 12 years ago or so, the only way to really be able to pitch an exhibition or get funding as a nonprofit or as a journalist to get coverage was to lead with X ethnicity. And what was really interesting towards more the tail end of my professional time in art and culture is it didn't lead. We were covering artists because they were great artists. And, they happen to be X, Y, Z. And that, Jordan, what you shared is what I hope is going to happen in the CPG space in the near future. So thank you for sharing that vision.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think that's a great way to evaluate our journey on this path, right? We talk about wanting change right now. It'll be great if we can look back in a year from now and look at the diverse, companies and stories that we're telling. And exactly right, Bella, like if we can get to that point, then we know we've been making good progress.
Fantastic. I think something else that you all briefly touched on in your introductions that I want to spend a little time thinking about too is this idea of the values you instill in your brand DNA. Bella, something you had mentioned, I think you all encapsulated, is this idea of moving from, thinking about your brand as a movement-based brand. Can you share a little bit more about that? I thought that was so interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, it's on all our product. It's be the aloha you wish to see in the world. And aloha not in this colonized, like aloha that tourism kind of sells to, like the true meaning of aloha. Respect, love, exchange, humility, kindness, peace. It is such a multidimensional word, and ha is the exchange of breath and the exchange of life. And so that has been hugely influential in, being born and raised in Hawaii and just our inherent values here in the islands. And it's something that we intrinsically feel is something that we can share with the world. And so, really from our commitment to everything I touched upon in our brief intro about, paying farmers a premium, about accessible price point, which is key, the tremendous diversity in our own team, committed to, just our larger social values of really the concept of as Shaka Tea rises, how can we do the most good in our local community, but then impact, people internationally. It's always been part of who we are. It's been interesting being in the raise mode where investors oftentimes, are like, oh, you have X potential because you could be a lifestyle brand. And I'm like, what's a lifestyle brand? That sounds so gimmicky and like the act of selling something. We are selling something, but we were founded on really these values. And how can you do the most good possible while you run a business that will one day be profitable, which I believe is completely possible. And there's so many great examples that have come before, and so many peers in the space too, which I'm honored to be on this panel with. All that being said, we've always said we're the Be the Aloha movement. And I think that could just be like a new terminology for a lot of brands that are inherently and intrinsically rooted in mission, while on their way to the pathway to profitability, or they already are there. So it's just something that we've been thinking a lot about.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point as we think about how companies can work together.
Mhm.
I want to switch over to, because I think this is really interesting and important too, this idea of the investment landscape. There's a lot of calls right now to fund Black founders. And Jordan, you shared something recently on LinkedIn, and it was really, it goes beyond that into rethinking investment criteria. Can you expand on your thoughts there?
Definitely. It was a response to seeing a comment from actually an angel investor who mentioned their goal was to invest in more Black founders this year. And there's a comment from an entrepreneur that I knew that said, hey, we talked a couple months ago and I never heard back from you. I have a great company and I fit within your investment criteria. And the investor responded like, oh, it just wasn't the right fit for me. It's not an industry that I'm interested in. And one thing I would challenge investors to do is to rethink the investment thesis that you have and going into which types of companies that you want to invest in. And right, so many investors will look at what does a successful company look like from the past 5 or 10 years, and will then try to find similar looking companies to invest in the future. But a lot of people of color and women have been negatively affected by lack of investment opportunities, lack of business opportunities. And so if you look back just demographically, you won't see as many visibly represented people of color. And so as an investor, if that's what you're using to make that decision, you're going to leave out a bunch of investment opportunities that could be really, really great. So I would actually challenge investors to make sure to reflect on what criteria you're using to make investments and actually be okay with being uncomfortable and taking a risk on the entrepreneurs that you invest in. So maybe that's a Black-owned founder who's serving a diverse or mostly minority population. Even if you don't have the personal experience and understanding that market, take the time to listen to the entrepreneur and the great amount of research and experience they have, and understand their actual experiences and take a risk on them. No matter what company you're investing in, it's always going to be a risk. And so I would say release some of your preconceived notions and get to know those entrepreneurs, get to know markets that you are unfamiliar with, and help to support and serve those markets.
Definitely. Julianne, you had also shared some of your sort of personal experiences in that realm too, as being a woman. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Yes. So when I first started out, I did go for investment, and I was very apprehensive, to be honest. And I decided to take a lot of advice from various people, consultants, who had built and sold businesses as well. And all of them said to me, you need to take a white male with you. And my first reaction was like, okay, why would that be? Why do I need to? I've got my business plan. I've proved traction in the market. My revenue figures are there. I'm actually in profit. Why do I need someone else with me at this point? And they said, it will give you the stability. It will show you're more investable. And I thought, oh, wow, okay, well, this is what I'm going to have to do. So from the get-go, I had already had that sort of feeling of actually, I'm not good enough, and I'm going to need to work 10 times harder to be able to get the same investment as someone else who isn't of colour. So I did every single investment pitch. I took my partner, who is white and a male, and I took him to every single meeting with me. And it was quite funny because the majority of the meeting he didn't actually contribute to. So it didn't matter. And they would always direct all the questions at him, and he would then have to refer back to me and say, oh, Julianne, would you mind expanding on that? Or Julianne, what was our revenue figures for that month? What's our cash burn rate? All of these questions that I was then having to answer, but I was going through someone else, and I felt like I was invisible in some of those meetings. Sometimes we didn't even get meetings as well, and I found that was, I echo Jordan there, he's hit the nail on the head. Sometimes people just shut you down before even willing to give you the time of day. And that's when I started taking off my picture off of the investment pitches, and I took off my name, and I put my partner's name on there, and suddenly we had more interest. And I was like, wow, this is actually the reality of it. They're not looking at a product, they're looking at the team, and I 100% agree with that, because investors invest in you as well as the product. But I do believe that I had something to give, and yeah, so that was my experience so far. I did obviously get turned down by a lot of investors at the beginning. I completely bootstrapped my company for the first 3 years. I then went on Dragon's Den, which is like the UK version of Shark Tank, and we got funding through that, turned it down, and then we did a crowdfunding, and we overfunded within 14 days with the public. So wow. It was a big turnaround to see how much buy-in the public had over investors and big PE companies, family offices. So it was a very different ballgame, and I think crowdfunding sort of leveled the playing field slightly, and allowed us to tell our story a lot better.
Julianne, that's an amazing story too, because one thing I wanted to add on top, I was just talking about how, sometimes investors might need to invest in areas that they're unfamiliar with. I've also seen that bias that you explained, where investors will see a person of color or a woman and think that their product will only serve that market that the founder represents, versus being able to apply towards a general mass market approach. And so, yeah, that bias definitely exists as well. So thank you for sharing that.
And Jordan, just to your comment about that, that's really interesting, because, when we started Shaka Tea, there were very early stages, some potential investors that we ended up not going with, but they were like, well, you're a mom, why don't we make this for kids? Mamaki happens to be caffeine free. And it was interesting to be put in that quote unquote box, but we've had such a varied experience with investment. Like one of our very first angel investors is a Black man, and he's been absolutely awesome in supporting us. And then we've had to deal with a slew of various VC potential investors, previously that would say really sexist things. And it became very uncomfortable about like trying to get at, I am a mom, I have 2 kids, if I was going to have more children, and very invasive that I conformed to the system to let them know like there were no more children, and it was like, oh no, my husband's had a Valentine's Day vasectomy, this is the primary baby. But it's like, whoa, that's such a private, invasive thing. I can now say this publicly in a webinar, but it's really not your business. Most recently we raised a round, and what's been really incredible is everyone has had a commitment from the get-go to diversity, to women, and it's never been an issue or even a thought point that I'm a woman and I'm a mom. And one of the experiences I really, really enjoyed about really the FoodBytes program, and another accelerator type program I was in was the Burt's Bees one, is that I was surrounded by parents. This is a side point, but so many of the other programs I've been in, I was the only parent. I had to bring up issues related to childcare, and they're like, oh, no one's ever asked us before about childcare. So really want to honor that space of being a woman, being a mother, and just, the need for inclusivity there in just CPG and how investors are thinking.
Yeah, definitely. And I think too, something, being a woman and a founder, Bella, you had shared some stats also before we move into Q&A with Nina. You had shared some stats about women founders as well as Black female founders. Can you share those with us just so we can get an idea of what that looks like?
Yeah, so 85% of all venture capital goes to all male teams. 3% of venture capital goes to all female teams. 1% of venture capital goes to Black founders, and 0.2% goes to Black women founders. But when you look at the past 5 years, Black women are starting businesses at a higher rate than any other group in America, yet they get so little of the funding. And just a side note, like if this is something you personally care about, I always thought, oh my goodness, one day when I become an investor, I have to be like quite financially successful. I'm a hustling entrepreneur, not able to invest big amounts whatsoever, but I learned about a really cool investment platform, Republic, which probably so many of you already knew about, and I've really enjoyed and really increments that make sense for me financially, $250 to $500, investing in a number of women businesses. One that I have to give a shout out to is an amazing 16-year-old Black female founder, Sienna Sauce, Taylor Simone. And I think there's a lot of ways that, you don't have to be so financially successful yet, that you can also get behind founders you believe in and wanting to flip that narrative.
Awesome, thank you. And just because we're short on time, I'm going to switch it over to Nina, who's going to moderate some of our Q&A, and I'm sure we'll address a lot more of this as well there. Nina?
Thank you, Jillian, and thanks everyone for the conversation so far. A reminder to everyone in the audience that's still here and with us, if you do have questions for these folks, jogged by what you've heard so far, please do drop them in the Q&A. We'd love to hear from folks on the line with their burning questions. And I think we've touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on this idea of, companies, the three of you are small and you're mission driven, you're founder led, and you're really taking a stance immediately and changing the way your companies operate. I think at the larger corporate level, there's sort of this fear of making mistakes or fear to speak up with potentially the wrong information. We've seen some sort of public, high profile companies in food and ag kind of making mistakes, retracting their statements. But I think that there's this idea of kind of failing forward and getting to a better place to sort of change the industry and take action for companies large and small. I'd love to get your thoughts on, because we talked about this a little on our prep call, your thoughts on how people can sort of, or corporations can start to meaningfully weigh in, large and small companies, and what that might look like from a sort of failing forward aspect. Jordan, maybe I'll start with you and then others can jump in there too.
Yeah, I think one thing that companies should be doing right now, if you haven't, you can start, is asking your own employees how they're feeling about everything that's going on, how they're doing, and what the company can do to make changes. Because I think you'll be surprised the number of people that will have an opinion or thoughts that can really inform that strategy. But I think as well, there's a larger, social media is on fire right now with lots of different discussions going on, and it can be scary to put out a statement and feel like the rest of the world's going to jump on you for it because you're still learning. And so I think it's okay to put out a statement, but really listen first before you speak and do so to the people who are communicating a lot of their issues. But at the same time, if you do receive criticism, instead of taking that offensively and walling off, I would say listen and say thank you. And even if you don't understand the criticism or don't believe it kind of at face value, seek to learn more and ask questions so that you can be better educated in terms of why the person who commented or someone else would feel that way, and ask to see if there's anything that you can learn from that comment or the approach that you said, because you might think that your words wouldn't offend anyone, and maybe they did. And instead of getting defensive, really ask and understand why, so that you can be further educated by that and continue to grow.
Thank you, Jordan. Absolutely agree. Julianne or Bella, do you have anything additional to add on that?
I think Jordan answered that perfectly. And I think just coming from a place of humility and always learning, the companies that are doing it best are coming from that place. So thank you, Jordan. I have nothing else to add.
Great. I want to turn it over to a question we just received that sort of ties into another one that I was going to ask too. But so sort of beyond the discussion and education, what types of actions do you think teams can take to promote racial equality and justice? I think the caveat there is particularly during a time where we still need to social distance and we're still dealing with the original, the pandemic in front of us. What other steps are you taking, or have you seen folks take on that front?
I mean, I think one of the things we've all talked about, and please, weigh in, Jordan and Julianne, is just the ongoing commitment. I totally understand the social distancing point, but this isn't a conversation. Jordan, you said something earlier that it very, very tragically resulted in watching a video of a man being murdered that got America activated to have this conversation, and that violence and that feeling resulted in people feeling something, that they would start making change and having these conversations and speaking up, and how do we ensure that this is something that there's so many, generations of systemic racism that we continue to, continues to be part of our conversation, and then actual action. It's a difficult place for me as a company that's majority people of color employees, and the context and when we operate in, to say what else we're going to do in terms of company culture, of whom we're hiring, who's getting, moving into senior leadership roles, because that would only be natural in our context. But I think if a company clearly has a lack of diversity challenge, one of the biggest things is who's on your team, whom are you hiring, and who are you promoting to senior leadership roles. That would be something I think of critical importance. Jordan, what are your thoughts, and Julianne?
Yeah, totally. I think one thing that, we kind of talked about sourcing and employees earlier. One thing that we made a conscious decision to do at TeaSquares is to work with organizations who established a training pipeline that worked with communities of color to educate and train those individuals on how to work in a professional setting, how to take care of their kind of personal affairs so that it didn't get in the way of the work that they were doing, and just give them the confidence and skills like resume building to be able to get a job. And so we actually sought out diverse organizations who provided job training to build a pipeline that specifically looked at a diverse set of employees coming in. And I think one thing too, there's also another question about not just talking about diversity, but inclusion. And I think that's really important because, especially in the US, and there's this idea that you might seek diversity on the outside, but not necessarily value the diverse experiences and opinions and experiences that those individuals bring to actually change the culture of the organization. And for some, that can be scary, because if people have different opinions than you, it can be tough to incorporate and listen to those. But I think it's really important in that, there's lots of studies that show that more diverse organizations are profitable. And it's not about their ethnicity. It's about different lived experiences that bring different viewpoints. And so it's really important to include those viewpoints and the variety into the conversation and into your decision-making process, and value those as at least just as valid, if not, an underrepresented voice that the company should look at.
Completely agree. At an organization level, like workplace inclusion involves like valuing difference, allowing employees the opportunity to develop while like participating, using their voice. But I do think this is a long-term strategy. I don't think it's going to happen overnight. It includes like fixing systems, practices, tackling with like bias, while also overcoming like structural issues in the organization as well that result in different perspectives not actually being valued. So I think that is really key. You can't like simply tell someone to be different or do different. You have to guide them and show them. There's a lot of companies I've seen in the UK. One in particular is Versida. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they specialise in diversity and inclusion. And Dan Robertson is one of the directors, and he basically spends his days supporting executives to turn diversity theory into like actual actions within the workforce. And I think as we grow, obviously we are a small team at the moment, but as we expand outwards over the next 18 to 24 months, we will look to get companies like this on board to help us create basically more meaningful actions rather than just theory.
Great, thank you, Julianne. We had a very short Q&A here. This is the first time we've done a 45-minute webinar, and I think it was slightly too short. So I know there was a lot to cover. I think you all shared incredibly salient insights, and I would say to that question, just before we sign off, because I do want to answer it, and in the spirit of what Jordan said earlier, I think our intention was to focus on both diversity and inclusion, and as FoodBytes, we should have looked at that full context and really taken into account both of the sort of ethos of what representation looks like, what equality looks like in the industry. And so I think that's a learning for us in how we continue to have this conversation. So I want to thank the anonymous person for bringing that up, and I want to share that we will continue to learn, fail forward, and do more on this front. So I'm going to hand it back to Jillian for a moment. I know we're a few minutes over. Thank you all for tuning in. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Nina, and a huge, huge thank you to our speakers today, Bella Hughes, Jordan Buckner, and Julianne Ponan. Your insights are incredibly valuable, and we appreciate your time. We will have a webinar recording and recap up on the FoodBytes website come this Friday, June 19th, so stay tuned and stick around for that. If you have any feedback for us, you can always reach out to us at foodbytes@rabobank.com, and if you'd like to get in touch with any of our speakers today, you can reach out to us as well. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.